Advice on how to start a conversation with a Jewish family that obviously does not believe Jesus is the Messiah. This particular family member is open to the differences between Christianity and Judaism without being combative. Where would you focus first, in particular in the Old Testament, to recommend the Jewish family member read? Are there any particular books outside the Bible you would recommend to enhance the conversation as well as material for the non-believer to read?
Okay, this is like more than one question.
Yes.
This is your typical BCC question.
Complex.
I have a question with 35 parts and subcomponents.
Only 2 there, so you're good.
So since my wife, her side of the family, her dad was Jewish and her brother, all of them, married into a Jewish family stuff, so I speak from having to do this,
Personal experience.
Mm-hmm. So anyway, I put down, I don't know, like 7 or 8 thoughts. Okay, so it may not be in the order of the question, but I will cover all the question.
Okay.
Right. So Matthew 5, verse 16. Jesus said, "Let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who's in heaven." He didn't say, do your great theology in front of them. He said, do your works in front of them so that they would glorify their God, your Father. So what is it that won the lost person to Christ? Well, and Jesus is speaking to Jews in Matthew chapter 5. It is the works that you did toward them, how much you loved them, how much you cared about them. You built your life into their life, and you showed them Christ. So the first thing I would say is, with a Jewish person, let your light shine in such a way that they see your great works of service to them, that Christ would have evidenced toward them. And then from that, you can then gain their respect and then get a platform by which to then share the word with them. Mm-hmm. So works and then the word. I wouldn't start with the word first, because you haven't earned the right to really talk to them. Mm-hmm. And so doing works to them, which could be a wide variety of things.
It's funny because I have a Jewish uncle, and it was his birthday the other day, so I had each child make him a video so we could send it. It's funny how it was so well received by him, and I thought, maybe that's interesting, opens the door.
Yeah,
right?
So you're shining your light, and you can shine the light of good sound doctrine to them, and there's a time and a place for that, but I wouldn't start there. Mm-hmm. And this can take years. Yeah. With my Jewish sister-in-law, they married my wife's brother, who's now deceased, but she's a tough cookie, and so I've only had a few theological discussions with her over the last 4 years, just a few. Yeah. And so being at her house and she's got her Passover plate, and her credenza, and she's a secular Jew, but she still observes Passover because it's built into her being, so to go, oh, I see a Passover plate, mm-hmm. So, then you start talking about Passover, and how do you feel about Passover? Why do you observe Passover? Which leads to another way to reach the Jew, is to ask questions, ask really good questions about them, especially if you're at their house and you see things, and show respect for them when you ask the questions. Mm-hmm. What do you see that, if they have a Hanukkah candelabra, why does it have that many candles on it? How did that happen? And how's that different than the menorah, which seems to have less candle arms off of it? And why are there more? And why are the candles so colorful? And asking questions to just get to know them, show respect for what they believe. So do your works before them, before you get to the words. Learn to ask really good questions. And I think one of the greatest books to learn how to ask questions, because evangelism is not about you dominating the conversation and telling them all that you know on theology, and they better get with the program and believe all this. So it's not about winning an argument. It's about winning a soul, and you're not going to win it by dominating through crushing all their viewpoints. So one of the greatest books for how to pose questions, and they'd be called Socratic Questions, is by Greg Koukl, Koukl is his last name. He has a book called Tactics, and it's the tactical approach to asking great questions. So he goes through his book and through different scenarios and explains how to pose questions to people of a different variety to get them to talk so that you can respond instead of you making definitive statements to a Jewish person. Well, Jesus is the Messiah. I mean, everybody knows that. No, you're making a definitive statement. What would be a question? You know, and so he teaches you how to ask questions. So if you want to learn how to ask questions, really good questions, that is the book, and it's an easy read, especially while you're on COVID lockdown. It's only about, I think it's probably about 120 pages. Okay. Paperback. And he's an apologist. Went to Talbot Seminary. He's on the West Coast. He debates. He'll debate like at UC Berkeley. I mean, he's a major player on the West Coast. Great writer, very practical. So do your works before them. Look for opportunities to show them the love of Christ, and that could be just driving them to a doctor's appointment. You're building a bridge to them, and then learn to ask questions. The other thing is, 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 20. Paul says, and Paul's a Jew, so Paul says, "To the Jews I became a Jew, so that I might win Jews. And to those who are under the law, as under the law, though not being myself under the law, so that I might win those under the law." So Paul goes on and talks in 1 Corinthians 9:20. Basically, his strategy is, even though I'm a Jew and I'm not under the law of the Torah anymore, like they are under the Torah, having to obey it to be saved, he said, I'm free from that because I'm saved by the gospel. But to win a Jew, I will do some of the things of the Jews to win them. That's what he says. So what does that mean? Well, he took that one vow at Cenchrea. He took a vow that was to build a bridge over to the Jews. So he would go to the synagogues to debate, to discuss, to teach, to read and stuff. He would go where they were. So he did Jewish things. So he would observe feasts and things that were Jewish to build a bridge to them. So you then have to ask yourself, how can I creatively become a Jew to a Jew? How do I build a bridge to them? How do I get into their world to be able to understand them? Do I even know the 7 feasts that they observe? Do I know the order of the feast that they do? Why do they observe these feasts? What's the significance of the feast? And so, and you can teach them a lot about the gospel just by the feasts, because Christ came and fulfilled all those. But if you show allegiance and knowledgeability of those feasts, then you become a Jew to them in the sense that you understand their world. So you have to figure out how you're going to do that. But how can I become a Jew to this Jew? To understand their jargon, their world, why they do what they do, etc. Right. Do you know what I mean? See. Okay, Randy Newman is a PhD scholar. He lives here in DC. I know him. He used to go to church here years ago. He's now, he travels and does evangelism on university campuses all around the United States. He's a debater. He's a really good guy. I love his humor. It's very, very sarcastic, very, very funny, but a very sharp guy. So he's a converted Jew, and so I would personally, if I were you, get to know someone, not know him personally, but read his books. So he's written a lot of books about evangelism. So he's got one book called Questioning Evangelism, and it's about technique. And part of that book is about questions, how to pose questions to people. Because used to, when I was younger, evangelism, whether it was to a Gentile or a Jew, was all about you dominating the discussion and
your way's the right way.
Yes, and just absolutely destroying their arguments.
Because we all want to fall in line with someone who does that to us.
Tell the love of Jesus. No. So anyway, so Questioning Evangelism is a good book by a converted Jew on how to reach people in general, but you can apply the same principles to a Jew. There's another guy named Moshe Rosen, and he wrote a book back in the 70s. I think I have an original copy of it, called Witnessing to Jews. Moshe Rosen. M-O-I-S-H-E, Rosen, R-O-S-E-N, Witnessing to Jews. It's a short book. I'm not giving you like 800-page tomes. This is it's a short book based on technique, and he goes through and answers all the things that you would want to know, and how do I build a bridge to them. And this is a Jew who's converted, who's sharing with you, how would you reach somebody like me? There is another guy, he's a converted Jew, his name's Michael Brown, and he's written a 4-volume set that you can purchase. I think they're only available in Kindle, but a set called Answering Jewish Objections to Jesus. That'd probably be good to know, because they're gonna, how could there possibly be a virgin birth? And I mean, all the typical questions you're going to hear from a Jewish person, you would probably want to read those kinds of books to know the answers to those questions, that when you do get a chance to talk to them, you're not standing there looking up at the ceiling going, well, I have to get back to you. But prepare now. And so get some tools like that by Michael Brown, a converted Jew who teaches you how to answer their questions. Then there's another converted Jew. This is a strange name. I'll spell it for you. Arnold Fruchtenbaum.
Good thing you told
me. Told you. Arnold.
Language.
Arnie. We call him Arnie. But so Arnold Fruchtenbaum, 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 German name, probably means fruit tree. But he's a converted Jew who has a website, and his website is called Ariel, which I think is the Hebrew word for lion. Ariel, ARIEL.org. This guy is prolific. He has written tons of articles. He has the only book in the world on the theology of Israel, called Israelology. He's an absolute brainiac to reaching Jews. So again, if I were you, I'd go to their website, ariel.org, and I would cruise around the articles that he has there. And he's a great resource because he's a Jew. And he has there's two video clips that he has on his webpage for just how you talk to Jews. He has another thing on there. It's a scrolling thing you can watch on all the prophecies from the Old Testament that refer to Christ as the Messiah. So you probably want to know those, which relates to my next observation.
Next point.
The other thing that I would do is I would get, and every Christian should basically own a copy of this book. Josh McDowell, he used to be the main debater on university campuses back in the 60s and 70s. He's who turned me on to apologetics years ago, back in the 70s when I was a young guy. So he wrote a book, he's written several books, but he wrote a book called Evidence That Demands a Verdict. And it's basically a logical approach to, is Jesus the Lord, or is he a lunatic? Or is he a liar? You got three options. So what was he? And he doesn't seem like he was a liar, and he goes through and shows why, and then it sure doesn't seem like he's a lunatic, because he didn't speak in such a fashion. So he claimed to be the Messiah, the Lord. So what's the proof? It's a book. It's not a book like you sit and read it. It's put together in like a legal argumentation format. It's not like any book you've ever read. The way it's put together, it's like a skeletal outline with main points and supporting points and subpoints. But you just flip to the section that's of interest to you, and what would be interesting of you in this situation would be, because a Jew needs to know. Like, I'm getting to the answer to the one question here about the Old Testament. Like, where would you go in the Old Testament? Well, I would make sure that I knew the 60 prophecies of Christ in the Old Testament, where they were, what they were about, and how Christ fulfills those. Because those are the job description. That's a job description of the Messiah. So that when they see him, they can go, check, tribe of Judah, check, line of David, check. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Jesus checked all 60. And so what Josh McDowell does is he goes through the 60 prophecies, shows you where they were in the Old Testament, shows you the New Testament fulfillment, and then he goes through at the end of that and gives you a mathematical probability study put together by a mathematician, I think his name's Peter Stoner, on how mathematically this could not have happened. There's not enough time in the cosmos for Christ to have fulfilled 60 prophecies exactly that he can't control. He had to be the Messiah. Mm-hmm. So, after you give him your word, your works, your words, etc., you're going to eventually want to get down to the nitty-gritty and pose the question, hey, have you ever considered all the prophecies from the Old Testament that point to your Messiah coming? And you got to ask yourself the question, did anyone in history ever fulfill those? And Christ claimed to have fulfilled all of those. Well, what are they? And I did this with my sister-in-law. I went back to Isaiah 53, the prophecy that Christ would be die for the sins of mankind. He'd be the suffering servant. And I went through after my, this was in 1993, after Liz's twin sister died, and we were, my sister-in-law was coming back through Northern California from San Diego, where we all were, and she was at our house, and she was, we were all still recovering from Liz's sister dying, and we sat out on the back patio, and she's like, well, Marty, what? I'm just kind of curious, why would you even believe Jesus is the Messiah? I've always kind of wondered, like, why would you think that? I'm, well, Martha, have you not considered? So I said, well, let's look at Isaiah 53 as a case in point. And so I took her through Isaiah 53, and she was dumbfounded. She said, I've never heard anything about this in my whole life. Because most Jews like that, like a secular Jew, like my sister-in-law Martha, they don't really know the Torah. And they don't know the prophets. They know here and there. But once you begin to teach it to them, it is shocking to them. So that's why you need to know those passages and be able to take them there. And so I wouldn't take them to a book per se. I would take them to the prophecies of Christ, which are laced all throughout the Old Testament, and learn what those are. Because they are the greatest statistical evidence for the fact that Christ is who he said he was. So in that book I have used that in witnessing to Jews and Gentiles more than any other book I own, what he says there about Christ's prophetic fulfillment. Because that changes everything. Because that means Islam's not true. That means Christian Science isn't true. That means Mormonism's not true. Because Christ was God in the flesh. That's prophesied. So anyway, then lastly, Josh MacArthur wrote a book in the 70s called More Than a Carpenter. Little tiny paperback that has been passed around to a zillion people in my lifetime. I think it's still in print. If not, you could probably get a used copy, online. But More Than a Carpenter, a little tiny paperback, maybe 80 pages, and it just explains to you why Jesus wasn't just the carpenter, and he was the Jewish God in the flesh. And that's maybe a good book to give them, and then give it to them and say, hey, after you read this, let's talk. Okay, question one.
Question one, awesome.
Hopefully that helps you. And there's other things that are unstated, like you need to pray. You need to pray for them because it's spiritual war. It's light and darkness battling, and whatever demon is assigned to them, they're not going to want them to listen to you. And so this is where Ephesians 6:10 and following comes into play, where you're not wrestling against flesh and blood, you're wrestling against demonic powers who want to keep people lost.
That's funny because I recently started praying for my uncle before then that
Oh, you did?
all
Okay.
went down. So it is.
You don't need me.
Yeah.
Yeah.